We'll start with prayer and then we'll dive in. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for this beautiful weather, for this place. Thank you for this body of believers, this local fellowship. Father, I thank you for the people who come here and for this opportunity to get into your word and to share your word. Father, we invite you to have your way here, that you make this time important because of your presence. We ask for your hand on our hearts and our minds, and that you would direct us, that you would bless us, that you would give us identity in you. Father, guide us as we go through your word and through your law, and show us what we are to take from it for now, for today, as people who believe in you and have received the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ. We thank you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So before I get started, I will point out that we are probably going to have some people coming in the back to bring in stuff for the covered dish later on. So that's for you guys, also the people watching. If you hear some strange stuff going on in the background, that's what's going on. But we're going to carry on as usual as we do. So starting off, just a quick review of last week. We did Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments. Again, I didn't really expect for that to go quite like it did. I'm glad it did. I enjoyed it. It was, I think there was a lot in there. But to summarize, basically we're looking at the 10 Commandments not from the standpoint of the Old Testament law, but as the nature of God and how those apply to us. So looking at the comparison between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, where the letter was very particular to the time and place, the spirit of the law being the heart of the God who had called people to have one God, Him, no other, to love one another, to not covet, to not steal, but to trust in the Father. Ultimately, everything about this, as we look at it through a New Testament lens, is a picture pointing us back to a relationship with the Father. Without going through all that all over again, we're just going to go ahead and pop right into, we're in Exodus 20, verse 18. Now, Moses has given these 10 commandments. He has not gone up the mountain yet. There was a brief there and then come back, and he's given this before he actually goes up for the official tablets and all that. So we've had the thunder, the lightning, there's smoke on the mountain, the earth is trembling, and this is Israel's response. When the people, verse 18, when the people heard the thunder and the loud blast of the ram's horn, and when they saw the flashes of lightning and the smoke billowing from the mountain, they stood at a distance, trembling with fear. And they said to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen. But don't let God speak directly to us, or we will die." "Don't be afraid," Moses answered them, "for God has come in this way to test you, and so that your fear of Him will keep you from sinning." As the people stood in the distance, Moses approached the dark cloud where God was. Now, we're actually going to jump over to Deuteronomy chapter 5 and look at this from a slightly different perspective. A lot of things we're going to see is like Exodus will give a lot of law, but then right there at the end of Moses' life, before they enter the promised land, he goes back over a lot of it and then really pulls out a lot of the details. Not even mentioning Leviticus and Numbers. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at, we have this brief little deal where they're afraid. They say, "You speak to us, but don't let God speak to us again or we'll die." And then we pop over to Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse, and as you go through it, it's basically the same scene. He just finished the 10 Commandments. But go into verse 22. It says, "The Lord spoke these words to all of you assembled there at the foot of the mountain." This is Moses recapping what had happened at that time. "He spoke with a loud voice from the heart of the fire, surrounded by the clouds and the deep darkness. This was all he said at the time, and he wrote his words on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me." Talking about the 10 Commandments. But you heard the voice from the heart of the darkness while the mountain was blazing with fire. All your tribal leaders and elders came to me. They said, "Look, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and greatness, and we have heard his voice from the heart of the fire. Today we have seen that God can speak to us humans, and yet we live. But now, why should we risk death again? If the Lord our God speaks to us again, we will certainly die and be consumed by this awesome fire. Can any living thing hear the voice of God, of the living God, from the heart of the fire as we did and yet survive?" Despite the fact that they did, and they're telling Moses to go do this. Anyway, go yourself and listen to what the Lord your God says. To be leadership. They're saying, we've heard the voice of God. It's too great and terrible thing. There's fire. If we hear this again, we'll be consumed. You go do it. We don't want to die. You do that.
Around a long time.
Right. Now, I will say that this is a pattern that we're going to see throughout the entire Bible. Over and over and over and over again, you see a representative. You see a substitution. We see it with the firstborns. All the firstborns belong to God. All the firstborn males belong to God. And so those had to be redeemed. But then Levi, the tribe of Levi, became the substitution. They're the ones that stood in service to the temple, the tabernacle, as the representative for them. And then you got the priest, and you got the high priest who serves as that one representative, so that everyone can't come in, so one represents. And then here Moses, same thing. Aaron, same thing. And ultimately we get to Jesus, who is that one representative. And the difference after Jesus is that we have that one representative, but the point of that was not so he could do it and we wouldn't have to. It was he did it. Jesus went and faced the voice of the God, spoke to the face in the fire, and he made things right so that now we can approach individually without fear of death, but also so that we can turn around for the lost and be that person who approaches and be the intermediary. So even though the pattern of going or you go, because if we do it, we'll die. And I think God even said later on, yeah, these people are so messed up, if I did come among them, yeah, they'd die. But we have Christ. We have that intercessor, that intermediary. He has done that, and he has put his righteousness, his acceptance by the Father on us so that we can approach. And now we are someone who can go between God and people so that we can represent him, ultimately to bring them into the fold as well. Anyway, verse 27, "Go yourself and listen to what the Lord our God says. Then come and tell us everything he tells you, and we will listen and obey." One little thing here is when they say, "Listen to what the Lord our God says," we see a real change in the way people refer to God now. Before it was always the Lord, the God of my father, so-and-so, or the Lord, the God of my father, so-and-so, or the Lord, my God, and then they'll refer to God as the Lord, your God. Even the servants in their own household would say, "The Lord, your God, does this." But at this point, now they're referring to God as the Lord, our God, and his name has become the Lord, our God, or the Lord, your God. I believe that a lot of the Hebrew translations just say Adonai, which means the Lord our God or the Lord your God. The nature of the relationship has already changed. Who they're calling, collectively, they're calling him the Lord our God. Verse 28, "The Lord heard the request you made to me, and he said, I have heard what the people said to you, and they are right. Oh, that they would always have hearts like this, that they might fear me and obey all my commands. If they did, they and their descendants would prosper forever. Go and tell them, return to your tents. But you, stand here with me so I can give you all my commands, decrees, and regulations. You must teach them to the people so they can obey them, and in the land I am giving them as their possession." Just want to make sure I'm not going off too far. Okay, so Moses told the people, "You must be careful to obey all the commands of the Lord your God, following his instructions in every detail, Stay on the path of the Lord your God has commanded you to follow. Then you will live long and prosperous lives in the land you are about to enter and occupy. And that's Deuteronomy 5. We're going to go on back to Exodus chapter 20. Anyway, so we got Exodus, like the one that's going here, and much simplified version of what of the account. I'm stuttering and stumbling all over the place here. A much simplified version, but I mean, ultimately, don't be afraid. God's doing this to test you. And in this, like when we see in Deuteronomy, is God has said, like, He wanted to see their reaction, wanted to see if they feared the Lord the way they were supposed to. And apparently they've passed that test, because He's like, I wish they would always have this heart. And in verse 21, as the people stood in the distance, Moses approached the dark cloud where God was. That had to have been quite a scene. I mean, we're still standing at the foot of this mountain. They've backed off, and they see Moses heading up toward this cloud. I mean, ultimately, he kind of just disappears in there. So here's what the Lord told Moses while he was doing this. Talking about the proper use of altars. And the Lord said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, you saw for yourself that I spoke to you from heaven. Remember, you must not make any idols of silver or gold to rival me. So first thing, no other gods. That comes up over and over again. It's kind of like it's important to him. Build for me an altar made of earth, and offer your sacrifices to me, your burnt offerings and peace offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Build my altar wherever I cause my name to be remembered, and I will come to you and bless you. If you use stones to build my altar, use only natural uncut stones. Do not shape the stones with a tool, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. And do not approach my altar by going up steps. If you do, someone might look under your clothing and see your nakedness. One of the things that strikes me about the law is there's a lot of regulations, a lot of rules, a lot of, like, this is how you do this is how you don't do this. But a lot of the law was just really practical. And it's just funny to me that we've got this book of Holy Scripture, and it has things like, and don't go up steps, or someone will look up your, like, your robes and see your nakedness. Like, think before you do this. In fact, later on, he actually even makes special undergarments for the priesthood just in case. But anyway, going back through these point to point. First off, again, no other gods. Nothing of silver, nothing of gold, nothing to rival him. So before we even talk about how you're going to worship me, you need to make sure it's just me. And then build it out of earth. So this is going to be something that's going to be either like clay. Well, I don't know about clay, but it's going to be probably of stones, because that's going to be most readily available. But he said, where to build it is wherever I cause my name to be remembered. You don't just build it anywhere you want to. This isn't about you. This is, honestly, you're going to be inspired to build an altar, obviously. But God's saying, I'm going to cause my name to be remembered somewhere, and you need to build something. You need to acknowledge me there. When you build it from uncut stones. And the significance here is, and I want to go back to when Moses met God at the burning bush. The first thing God said is, take your sandals off your feet, for you're standing on holy ground. And there's kind of a parallel between this, is where when you're on holy ground and you're standing there, the earth is something that God made. The body is something that God made. The sandals is something that man has altered. So take off the thing that man has done, so that it's just God's creation and God's creation. When we build an altar, when they build an altar, they gather the stones that God has already made. Their shape, their size, that's something that God has allowed, God has ordained. He had control of that. Anytime that we go and we try to change that shape, we're assuming that our vision is better than what God has already provided. We're assuming that we can make something, we can improve it when God has already put it in that place. And so we can't fix it, we can't adjust it. As soon as we add our efforts to it, we have made it less than it already was. You can talk about that all day long. looking earlier on at like when Abraham tried to help God, and Abraham and Sarah, and ended up with Ishmael, lots of trouble there. People tried to help, and when they put their hands on it, they caused problems. But in this, God's saying that it's better for us to do nothing at all than to try to fix something or try to improve something. We need to understand that what God has provided is enough and good enough. Our work cannot please Him. Our actions, our best efforts are not going to be good enough, so it's better to just leave it as He's already got it set up. The obvious exclusion to that is later on when He gives the very specific instructions for building the tabernacle, building the altar, the official altar, the Ark of the Covenant. But I mean, it goes down in meticulous detail. You make it this wide, this long, this deep. You make it with this kind of wood. You put it this kind of gold. When you do the work, you hammer it on. There's not to be any melting and pouring. You actually beat it into shape, and then there has to be a rod and such. And then, I mean, God's saying, like, if you're going to do something, you're going to create something, it needs to be after my pattern, my specific pattern, and it's only the fact that you're obeying me that makes that okay. So with the altars, don't mess with the stones, just stack them up, and don't try to shape them. Go with what's available, what God's provided. And again with the steps. I believe that later on that the altars were set up with ramps, but again it provided special clothing for that purpose. Now we've got a couple of chapters between chapter 20 and when the story actually takes over again. And typically, I'm really more of a storyteller, more of a teacher of the interaction of people, of characters, of personalities, because, again, my main heart has always been, I want to show the relationship between the Father and His people. So the next 2 or 3 chapters is largely about law. It doesn't get into the meat and bones of the law, but it does, like chapter 21, subtitles Fair Treatment of Slaves, Cases of Personal Injury. I am going to read through some of that. I may end up reading through all of it, but I don't really want to dig deep into the letter of the law. Like I've said before, there's people who are more qualified than I am. So I may read through some of it. I may summarize some of it. I will make sure that we have references so that anyone can go through and check and double check. But some of it I definitely do want to cover because there are some parallels here. There are some references that the New Testament brings up that I'd like to mention. Just giving you a fair warning that I'm not really sure how we're going to do this. I'm just going to go through and see how it flows. But Exodus 21, fair treatment of slaves. Obvious first thing is that this is not a law that we're really worried about. One thing, there's no slavery that we end up having to do. It's not like we're going to have to worry about this in the particulars. However, one thing to point out is the slavery in this country at this time is nothing like, or very little like, the slavery that we know in like America's history. And the part of the reason is because many of these laws and things were not even considered. The definition on both sides is vastly different. One thing that we hear frequently when God talks about how to deal with slaves is like, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, and remember you know what it's like. You aren't any better than these people. These are particular to when you buy a Hebrew slave. So, verse 1, these are the regulations you must present to Israel. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve you for no more than 6 years. Set him free in the 7th year, and he will owe you nothing for his freedom. One of the reasons someone might sell themselves into slavery, and basically what you're doing is you're selling your 24/7, a period of your life for a certain price. People would get into a situation, either they had a business venture or they had some sort of catastrophe, and they have debts that they cannot pay. And so one of the ways that they would do that is if I owe, say, Joe over here X amount of money and there's no way I can pay it, like my crops are gone, my cattle has died, I've got nothing. So what I can do is I can sell him or trade off with him so many years of my life, my full service, my dedicated service to him, and he accepts that as the payment, with the understanding that it can only be for 6 years. So that person has got to decide, okay, is this service worth the debt that I've got? Also, you've got, like, if the head of a household does this, if he offers himself, then he's also offering his household. So the service of that whole household comes. His wife, his children, they're all part of that bargain. And so say somebody owes him a large amount of money and they can't pay, it's like, well, okay, I can get, like, in return for that, I can get the workforce of this whole household that, say, doesn't have their cattle or their herds or their fields. They can't work anyway. They've got no way to pay me, but I can get all that labor force adding to my own supply. And then at the end of the 6 years, or whatever term is accepted, I mean, they may not owe 6 years worth of labor, it may be 3 years. So you basically hire them. They can't work anywhere else. I mean, it's more than just employed. They are, I mean, their freedom is purchased for that time, but that's part of why it becomes a worthwhile deal. So I've got you 24/7 all the way through. So, verse 3, if he was single when he became your slave, he shall leave single. But if he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be freed with him. So you can't, like, pick and choose. I mean, this is a package deal. If his master gave him a wife while he was a slave, and they had sons or daughters, then only the man will be free on the 7th year. But his wife and children will still belong to his master. Won't get into details on that because I don't fully understand it. But the slave may declare, and this is important, I love my master, my wife, and my children. I don't want to go free. If he does this, his master must present him before God. Let me just check that. Or before the judges. Then his master must take him to the door or doorpost and publicly pierce his ear with an awl. After that, the slave will serve his master for life. Obviously, there's a lot between the lines here. If we've got a slave or servant that is in the household, and he's been there, say, his 6 years, and his master has treated him very well. I mean, obviously, you're not going to find somebody who's, like, if he's being treated awful, he's not going to choose to be in this situation. So this is something, the master can't impose this, it can't force this on the servant. But if he comes to the point where the master has given him things, he's given him responsibility, he's given him a wife, he's given him a family, and he's come to where, like, my life is better with this master than it was when I was free. Like, I have more in my life now than I did then. Then he can come up and say, I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. I want this relationship to continue. And then they go publicly, they go before the judges. He's got to declare this. It's got to be something where he tells the public, tells people in authority, this is my choice. I choose this. And then the master goes through and pierces his ear on the doorpost. It's like, I'm nailing you to my household. You are become part of, I guess, legally part of the property. An interesting thing is, like, if you have, like, today, if you sell building materials and they're on the property, then it's still materials. But once it's actually been nailed to or fastened to the house, then it becomes part of the structure and it can no longer be returned. I think there's part of the same thing here, is once they've nailed this person to this doorpost, they've now become part of the property. This is a permanent thing. He is now, but not just part of the property, he is now part of the household. He has joined with his family in a legal way. So if anything ever happened to his master, he would go along with whatever that deal was as well. Now, when we look at the New Testament and we see references to bondservant, this is what a bondservant is. It is someone who has basically bound himself to a master, has given his life willingly, so, like, my life is better with this master than it was when I was on my own. So I am now willfully, like my own choice, my own free will, I'm giving myself to him for permanent service. That's what, like, when I think Paul and I think James also like referred to themselves, said that we should be bondservants or bond slaves to Christ, is we're better with this master. Like the life I was living before, I was in trouble, I needed his help, and he has proven to be a master that's better than I was. So I've given myself to him. This is what we're talking about. We are professing that this is better. We are making this choice, free will, and God is accepting us, and it's permanent. It involves complete dedication and devotion. Anyway, this is the image that it was going to. Now, before I get to this next part, I will say that I spent probably the last 15 years teaching middle schoolers. So I've taught, and because of that, I'm dealing with other people's kids, and they're like 12, 13 years old. Always real careful about the topics that I covered. And so there were certain subject matters that I just avoided, because there's conversations I don't want to have in a group of boys and girls that are in middle school, for one, and I don't want the parents to come along and say, like, what are you doing? So, like, for instance, Lot and his daughters, they never heard about that from me. It's in the Bible, it's good, but there's just things that are appropriate and they're not. But I've taught that age group for so long that I get to certain subject matter, and I, like, habit and lifestyle, like just teaching practice gets in the way. So if you see me slow down on occasion, that's part of it. Verse 7. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of 6 years as the men are. If she does not satisfy her owner, he must allow her to be bought back again. But he is not allowed to sell her to foreigners, since he is the one who broke contract with her. But if the slave's owner arranges for her to marry his son, he may no longer treat her as a slave, but as a daughter. This gets complicated, and without going real deep, if you are a father of a daughter and your prospects are slim, and you know someone who can provide, and there is the potential that she could have a better life. If you don't have any money, and you've got to sell your your daughter for something, it's because you don't have the ability to give her a dowry. And so you do this, and again, it's not like the picture that we might have based on our culture. We've got to be careful not to look at this through the lens of our culture. You are putting her in a place of service. It's kind of like hiring her out, or apprenticing, like you would apprentice like a young man in the old days. Kind of like, but not really. Like I said, I can't go too deep into this. But it's the potential that she may find favor in that house, and the master of the household might find her suitable as a potential bride for his son. So you may be able to improve her prospects by doing this. And I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that. But if the slave owner, okay, let me move back here. But he is not, okay, I think I just scrolled here. Let me run back over that real quick. Verse 8, if she does not satisfy her owner, he must allow her to be bought back again. So she's in this situation. She didn't prove, she didn't achieve what she was hoping to achieve. She didn't find favor in the eyes. Now, he can't just sell her off. He can't give her away. He can't just set her free, because in the way God has got things set up, a woman has always got to have a covering. There has always got to be a protection for her. She cannot be abandoned. She cannot be just set loose. That business with Adam and Eve, where he told Eve, like, you're going to desire a husband, but he will rule over you. That was a promise that God made. It says you're going to be covered. Women are going to have a protection. That's how I intend this. So if the daughter is sold, she can't just be abandoned. She has to be sold back to the family. Or it has to be available to. That option has to be available. But he is not allowed to sell her to foreigners, since he is the one who broke the contract with her. But if the slave owner arranges for her to marry his son, he may no longer treat her as a slave, but as a daughter. So if this works out, that arrangement, I mean, that's null and void. She's now become your daughter, and her whole status has changed. So, verse 10, if a man who has married a slave wife takes another wife for himself, won't get into that right now, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. If he fails in any of these three obligations, she may leave as a free woman without making any payment. So, all right, she was a slave, she's married, her status has changed, but he may decide he's found somebody else who is of a better status, better political arrangement, better business arrangement, whatever. Not going to get into all the other stuff, but if he does marry another, he cannot neglect her. He can't just, again, God is very clear. You look through these laws, and a lot of them, especially through the lens of our culture, they seem harsh, they seem wrong, they seem abrasive. But if you look at what's going on here, always it is that this woman who is in this situation, this is not her doing. This is not her fault that she's being who she's supposed to be. If he messes up, he is not allowed to abandon her. And if he neglects her, if he decides to do this other business, if he neglects her, then she's free of him. She can just walk away. Now, presumably, she goes back to her family, but she's free. I mean, whatever debt she had, completely done. If he does not live up to the obligations, his the requirements as a husband, because he took her as a wife, then he breaks the contract, and she no longer owes anything. Depending on what kind of jerk the guy was, she may feel like that was the better end of the deal. But this also puts a lot of burden, a lot of realization that there is obligation, that these choices that people are making, they have consequences. There's a weight of debt, a weight of responsibility. And that's one of the things that keeps coming up in here, is you have an obligation to other people. This is love your neighbor as yourself. It's all through this. I mean, everywhere you look, how you treat people under you, how you respect those that are over you, how you treat other people's property. That's what all of this goes through. There is a weight, there's a responsibility, there is a consequence that is very real. And in many occasions, the consequence is so severe that the whole point is you need to understand that you need to think through what you're doing. You need to weigh out your actions and the consequences before you start just being careless. Because a person who's careless in this society is, we try, but you see people who commit terrible crimes, and the punishments, they serve time. In this day and age, you commit a crime, you pay back, or you receive the same kind of crime that happened to you. That's what we're looking at with personal injury, cases of personal injury. This is verse 12. God's making a distinction here between someone who, what's the difference between murder and accidental, manslaughter? And the wording here is interesting to me. It says, verse 12, anyone who assaults and kills another person must be put to death. Death for death. That ought to be a pretty good encouragement to control yourself, to be careful, because if you kill, there is no this many years for this type or this many years for that type, or possibly whatever. Is if you murder someone, you must be put to death. But if it was simply an accident permitted by God, that wording is interesting, I will appoint a place of refuge where the slayer can run for safety. It's God's like, if it was an accident permitted by God, like this was an accident that God did not prevent, then yes, there has been a death, there has been a slaying, but I'm going to provide a place for that person to run to. Let me go ahead and read this and I'll come back to that. Verse 14, however, if someone deliberately kills another person, then the slayer must be dragged even from my altar and be put to death. In their culture, what they would have is it's called a bloodsman redeemer, bloodkin redeemer. the nearest relative of the person slain would be honor-bound, duty-bound to find the slayer, the killer, and go and put them to death. You can't say that like anybody anytime someone kills another person, that person has to be killed and not have something set up to make that happen. So the culture, the law was set up so that if you kill my brother, me as the next of kin, I've got to come kill you. Now, it may have been on purpose, it may have been an accident. If it was on purpose, and obviously on purpose, I've got to hunt you down, I've got to take you out because you have murdered, and so your life is forfeit. And it's my responsibility. I'm the one who has to take care of this. However, if it was an accident, he's still dead. It's death for death. But God will set up that at that point, and there's things that will come into play that gets explained later on in the law, that person can flee. There will be cities of refuge, specific places where they can go and they'll be tried. There'll be a trial, and if it can be proved it's an accident, that person can live there in that city of refuge for as long as the high priest is alive. And once the high priest has died, then they can go free. But if they ever leave that city of refuge, then they can be, the kinsman redeemer can come through and kill them, and that's the law. It's like, I've made a place of safety for you, you leave it, that's on you. That's a picture of covering all over the place. But what he's saying here is there's a difference between an accident and deliberate murder. It says if someone deliberately kills another person, the slayer must be dragged even from my altar and be put to death. So I don't care if they're standing right there, they're holding on to the altar and they're crying out for mercy. You murder, you will be put to death. Drag them away from my altar and put them to death. God has no tolerance for murder. And then right after that, verse 15, anyone who strikes father or mother must be put to death. You murder someone, you should be put to death. But if you even strike your father or mother, you should be put to death. Again, the consequences are real. God is setting a very strict, severe standard. Verse 16, kidnappers must be put to death, whether they caught in possession of their victims or have already sold them as slaves. I think we might see a lot less kidnappers. I'm not saying we should do this. It's in the Bible. But if there was a death penalty for kidnapping, it's a serious thing. They should be put to death. Even if they returned the people, or you got them and returned them, or they're lost forever, doesn't matter. You took somebody that you had no right to take, death. And then verse 17, anyone who dishonors father or mother must be put to death. Another translation of that says, anyone who speaks disrespectfully of father or mother must be put to death. I find this interesting, and I'm probably going to wrap up with this for today. But we've got murder, accidental, deliberate, put to death. Then anyone who strikes father or mother must be put to death. Then we got kidnappers. Okay, we got murder, slapping your mom or your dad. That sounds bad. Kidnapping, which, yeah, okay. And then anyone who dishonors or speaks disrespectfully, they should be put to death. It's very interesting to me that the parental part is put in there twice, and the way it's put in there twice. This is something where God is trying to make something very clear, or at least trying to really emphasize the importance. The respect we show our parents and the honor that we show our parents is important to God. And so I frequently come to a point where I see God's doing something, I see a pattern in the Word, and I'm like, okay, so why? Why is this significant? Why is this important? And a couple of things come up to mind. It's like, while we are no longer under the death penalty, thanks to Christ, God's heart is still the same. So we look at parents and, all right, everything we have in this world, this world as we know it, has been created with a design that ultimately points to things as a spiritual. Like, we have things in this life and they're made the way they are so that we can understand spiritual truths. That's why Jesus was teaching with parables all the time. It's not that he just came up with something, well, this is similar. It's like, no, God made these things to work this way so that we can understand the spiritual stuff. A lot of times we think that this is the important and that's the stuff that we're whatever. But really, everything that we've got, the way it's designed is so we'll understand. We understand seasons and the passing of time so that we understand eventually God has got this clock that is working down to the second coming and to the New Jerusalem, new heaven, new earth. We have, well, get into all that, but we have relationships, like the relationship between the church and God, and that whole picture of the bride of Christ. Marriage relationship established a certain way. We're called the bride of Christ, which means he's the head and we're supposed to submit. But that marriage relationship, the way God's called it, is a picture of the relationship we're supposed to have with him. So looking at those parallels, we look at our parents, and whether we agree or disagree, we know the parents are human parents. We know that they're fallen people just like us. However, they are a picture of the Father to us. So for us to have this authority, also, they are the authority that God has put over us. They are our King Saul, or they are our King David, depending on how they do and how we do. This is an authority that God has put over us. If we strike them, we are not actually striking them. We are actively striking at the authority that God has anointed and put over us. We are rejecting God, not them. If we speak disrespectfully of them, again, we go to the stuff that talks about speaking about the government and mocking the authorities and the rulers. We have to understand that the people that God has put in authority over us, who has made us coverings for us, these are people that God put there. And whether they're good, bad, we like them, dislike them, whether we agree with them or disagree with them, we have to acknowledge and honor the position or the authority because it comes from God. Now, there are right ways and wrong ways to deal with disagreements. Speaking disrespectfully of our parents or of authorities that God has put over us, or striking out at them, this is a rejection of what God has put in our life. The right way to do this is to seek God and seek his guidance and ask for wisdom and learn through this. No parent is perfect. No parent does it just right. My parents tried, and if I wanted to, I could list off all kinds of times where they misunderstood me, and there's lots of stuff they did right too. I'm not going to sell that, but I can look back now and look at the places where they didn't understand, or they misunderstood me, or they misjudged me, and see. But they always taught me to seek God. They always taught me that the Word of God was true. So as I grew and I sought answers. I saw where God strengthened me through the misunderstandings, the places where I was forced to seek God and seek comfort some other way than just being treated fair. My dad always called fair a four-letter word. But I see the places that I grew and got stronger, and my relationship with God grew because of, for lack of a better way of saying it, their failings. Those things were part of God's plan. Nobody's perfect. Nobody can do it just right. We have to trust that God has a plan. I take great comfort in this as a parent of 2 teenagers. I have decided I'm going to do my best, but where I fall short, I'm going to trust God to use those shortcomings to show his greatness, to build them up and strengthen them. The areas that I am weak and fail in are going to be the areas that they are going to have to step up in. And the only way to do that is to seek the Father. All that, again, coming back, putting murder and kidnappers in the same category, in the same breath nearly, as striking your father or mother or dishonoring your father and mother, not an accident. In fact, this shows up several other times. Later on, we'll see, you shouldn't, I think it's, should just wait, but I believe you should not suffer a witch or a sorcerer or a medium to live, and then right after that is anyone who strikes their father or dishonors their father or mother should be put to death. It keeps getting thrown in there. You'll find it over and over again. They'll be right in the middle of all this, don't dishonor your mother and father, and then they keep going on and on. It's okay. So anytime you see something repeated in Scripture, it's important. And if it seems like it's out of the blue, it's out of nowhere, it doesn't really seem to fit the pattern, it does, Ask why. Pray about it. Seek God. Find something in there, because it's no accident. This is the inspired Word of God. And we have the Holy Spirit that inspired in us. We should ask. We should see the patterns. We should ask about them. And ultimately, we should love the Lord our God and trust that He is wise in the way He has put people in our lives, put people in authority in our lives. And seek Him to see what is the right way. I mean, most of the law is about God has a right way to deal with people, to interact with each other, to respect each other and each other's property. So if we would just get a grip on that whole love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, and what God actually means by that, we wouldn't need the law. Like Jesus said, it would be all summed up. You'd have everything, all the law and the prophets are summed up in those two things. But since we're people and we live in this fallen world, I'm really glad we have the law as something so that we can get a snapshot, a peek into the character of God. On that note,